Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first Twitter Spaces for SubQuery sessions. This is the first time we're doing this, and we'll just give a few more minutes for people to join, to enter. I've got Sam here, looks like he's online, and we're just waiting for Betty as well.
Morning.
Morning, Sam. How are you doing today, Sam? Where are you calling from again?
I'm in London, so doing really well.
Yeah, it's early for you. First call in the morning for you?
It is actually, yeah, it is, which is a change because normally Mondays, we do like a team meeting, and we've got 2 people in Australia, so normally the first calls are at 7 a.m. So I'm really thankful that this is the first one.
Yeah, well, I hope you had a good coffee this morning to get yourself in the zone.
Absolutely.
Hey, Betty, how are you doing?
Oh, hey. Good. Yourself? Hi, everyone.
Hey, Betty.
Hey, Sam.
Very good. Well, let's kick off and let's get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining the first SubQuery sessions. This is a Twitter Spaces series that we're about to kick off, and we'll probably be running, if not monthly, maybe bi-monthly from here on out. We're really looking forward to it, and we're going to be covering a lot of different topics with a lot of different speakers. But today, we are very lucky to be joined by 2 powerhouses in Polkadot. Sorry. Betty Chen from Acala and Sam Alamain from Imbue Network. Welcome to the SubQuery sessions.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Betty, should we start, ladies first, with introductions?
Sure. Thanks, James, for having me here. And this is Betty, calling in actually from Australia, Sydney. And I'm one of the co-founders of Acala. And we are building a parachain on Polkadot. I'm sure we can go into details, but we are essentially building a MakerDAO like a stablecoin called Acala Dollar, and also a bunch of supporting protocols. But of course, multi-chain by nature because we are on Polkadot. But yeah, so that's us. We've been around for 2.5 and close to 3 years, so know many people in the Polkadot world, and also more and more people, actually builders, coming into the field. So it's really great to see it basically going through the 0 to 1 process in real time. So yeah, so glad to be here.
Thanks, Betty, and you certainly need no introduction in this kind of space. But Sam, it's great to have you as well, and you've been around the space for a wee while, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm Sam Alamain. I'm the founder of Imbue Network. As Betty said, we're really excited to be building on Polkadot for a variety of reasons that I think some of them will be touched upon in this space. But Imbue at its core is a crowdfunding platform. It's decentralized Kickstarter, and the reason we're building it is one of our biggest frustrations in this space, in the Web3 space, has been lack of accountability. And what Imbue does is ensures accountability by the blockchain because it allows people who are funding to vote on progress. And if that progress doesn't happen, those funds don't get unlocked. And if there's no progress at all, the funders can ask for their money back for a refund by issuing a vote of no confidence. So it's really funding through democracy and ensuring accountability. And Polkadot is just by far the best chain to build this on. And I hope that we'll be able to talk about why over the next few minutes. So yeah, I'm just really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really looking forward to asking a lot of questions about your approach to funding because it is a big issue. But let's start. So I guess the first thing I want to talk about, and which is really the theme and the main thread that this space is really about stablecoins and the need for them in our industry, the need for them to be quite stable, which obviously is a very topical based from the previous events of 2 weeks ago with Terra. For those that have been living in a hole somewhere or in a cave, Terra, the Terra ecosystem, which was kind of based upon two tokens and the relationship between the two, Luna and USDT. The ecosystem collapsed over the space of a week, and it was very unfortunate, I think, for a lot of people involved. We worked very close with a lot of teams, so it was very heartbreaking to see. Really, what the biggest impact is it kind of rocked our understanding of what it is to be a stablecoin. And now, Betty, you are building another stablecoin, the Acala dollar, the Acala AUSD. What are you doing differently from Terra?
So that was certainly a very topical thing, James. And I have a lot of sympathy for the Terra ecosystem and community. I also know some builders in that ecosystem. So really, I think for builders, things work and things don't work. It's important that for builders, can continue to build. I'm relatively optimistic about people who actually trying to improve things, innovate, and build. And I'm also personally, reaching out to folks and supporting them in any way that I can, because this is not the first ups and downs that we've been through. Like for those who's been around for multiple cycles, like even for Acala, we started in a bear market when nobody actually want to talk to anyone who's building crypto, essentially. So I understand how difficult it might be, but from experience, it is probably also one of the best time to actually head down and actually build and really asking yourself the difficult questions. Is what you're building going to solve some needed problems, and whether there's product market fit, removing all the hype and all the, I guess, facades that may blind you from the real thing that you're trying to build. So that's what I want to comment on that sort of. I think it's probably can be coined as a black swan incident in the crypto world. And then as for Acala, for the stablecoin that we are building, it really dated back, I guess, 2.5 or 3 years ago. And then prior to that, we actually is probably one of the first, if not the first, outside contributors to the Substrate GitHub repo or the open source project that Gav and his team started. Very early on, we've developed code and PR'd into that repo and had quite a bit of passion looking at the tech that Gav built out. And we were so early on, and then we are also one of the first project being granted by the Web3 Foundation, and they granted for decentralized stablecoin. So when you actually build a decentralized stablecoin for a native multi-chain, so essentially Polkadot is this internet of blockchain, right? People say it's layer 0. It's really because it's not actually trying to build a specific blockchain for any specific purposes, or the generic blockchain, as an EVM chain that's quite commonly out there. It is actually trying to build the infrastructure for creating chains and also creating infrastructure for having shared security as well as shared common communication amongst all of these chains, so that you actually can have a web of blockchain that can talk to and also trustlessly trust each other for whether they are transferring values or contents to each other. So that's what Polkadot is really about. And it also makes sense. Amongst the first infrastructure they fund is a decentralized stablecoin, because now you've got an internet. Like, what next do you need to actually grow or kind of build on top of the internet? It's actually an economy, right? Because it's like the real world that we live in, or the fiat world that we live in. Without an economic base or infrastructure, it will be very hard to build anything native to Web3. And this is really come on to the premise of crypto assets. They themselves, like utility tokens, like DOT, Bitcoin, they're volatile by nature, right? And how do you actually draw liquidity out of them? And then how do you create more stable medium of exchange, and also have liquidity that can be used across the entire multi-chain network. This is really the premise of decentralized stablecoin. And like, don't confuse that with, just the need for a stable asset to be used to pay your salary or doing any other stuff, because there are actually different ways to create stablecoin, and they kind of good at different things and also bad at certain other things. So in general, when we did this, and we had a really close look at all different mechanisms, and over so many years passed, and there are still three categories in general, how to create stablecoin. So the first category is fiat-backed stablecoins. These are the ones that are created by centralized entity, like USDC and USDT, and they're not strictly cash backed, right? Because if you actually look into, of course, relying on what those entities report to you, you can actually see, if you're actually holding one USDT, it kind of represents a certain percentage of cash, and also a certain percentage of treasury bonds and a number of other different non-cash assets, right? So this is what you are actually holding. They're not actually one-to-one, to cash, but it's mostly important to know what you are holding. Similarly to USDC, although you can actually read their online report, each USDC, what's behind the scene is backing that one USDC. So this is one category. And then the second category is MakerDAO, like over-collateralized stablecoin, like MakerDAO's DAI, and also Acala's AUSD. And in this category, the goal is really to create crypto-native stablecoin, and also another aspect to it is actually create a credit lever or a credit system that can actually draw liquidity out of the crypto assets that you want to hold on to, right? So from MakerDAO's story, it was actually a really good story. If you are not crypto OG, you didn't know that. They're a very respectful team. And we have a lot of respect for them, and because they've done quite a bit of work in over-collateralization, and we've certainly used the over-collateralization model, but also built quite a number of innovation on top of what they've done. You really have to appreciate in a field like Web3 that most of our work are in open source, right? So if you have teams building even remotely similar concepts or mechanisms, that you need to appreciate, because constantly we know some members in their community, and they probably know some of members in our community, and then we often look at the events that happen, the markets up and down, and also different risk parameters, and learn from others' challenges so that we can actually improve and build upon. Because you have to say everything in crypto, Bitcoin included, you still have to say it's still an experiment, right? So that's the second category, and the third category is what you alluded
just to
to.
interrupt. For those that aren't DeFi natives, what does collateralization mean? That's quite a technical term that gets thrown around a bit, but how can you over-collateralize a coin?
That's a good question. So collateral just means what asset that you put down into the protocol to secure and generate $8. So maybe an analogy would be, in the real world, is you collateralize your house and then you draw some cash out of it for renovation. So this is what you often do in the real world, that you can collateralize your house and then you draw like a revolving credit, but you essentially means you're drawing some cash out of it. And often people do this by getting those cash to renovate their house, so that hopefully their house value going up, and then it actually helps their asset. And of course, if you couldn't pay back, right, those cash, your house is in danger, because you are making your house kind of like a security or deposit, and the bank can have a claim on it. If you use this kind of analogy in MakerDAO or in Acala's model, then you put down your crypto assets as collateral. If you couldn't actually pay back the dollars that you generate, whether it's DAI or AUSD in Acala's case, then the protocol has a claim on your collateral. Essentially, what that means is, it will actually sell off the collateral to pay back the debt. So the protocol keeps itself insolvent, and then pays down the debt that you owe, and the remaining collateral will be returned to you. The reason why it's always over collateralized, the model that we chose is over collateralized is mainly because crypto assets are volatile. It goes up and down. So it always have a buffer, essentially the buffer to go above water, right? If it gets close to the water line, like 1-to-1, then it will actually sell off the collateral before it goes to 1-to-1, just to be safe, right? So does that help?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So you're trying to build in a safety margin into the coin itself to make sure that there's always more fiat value of the collateral than the amount of AUSD that has been issued.
Yeah.
And then so the third and final obviously is what Terra is, right? An algorithmic stablecoin. Tell us about that.
And like, just to be clear, Terra is not the only one doing this experiment. Like, many people attempted to not use collateral, and also not use fiat, like a centralized entity, and then to build something that's using algorithm to kind of peg the dollar. And like, I'm overgeneralizing here, but most of the algorithmic stablecoin use some sort of algorithm to manipulate supply and demand of the token, so that it keeps the peg, right? And some people also argue that isn't the Fed also doing the same thing with the U.S. dollars? They also, increase supply, and also sometimes use, raising interest rates, some other mechanism to kind of trying to keep the peg to the economy. But of course, the fiat world that we live in is way more complex, and the U.S. dollars are having not only deeply embedded in many of the different ways that we use them. Like, you can use to buy a house, forex trade, are mainly centered around US dollars. It also got military backing. So it's way more, I guess, embedded into every part of our world, compared to, a new algorithm that is trying to control the supply and demand purely to stabilize the dollar peg, right? So far, many of the algorithmic stablecoin attempts have not been so successful. Mainly, I guess, when the market goes to one direction, it probably have this reflexive effect that it can bootstrap itself really well. But when it goes to the other direction, because of the design of it, it also is difficult and very challenging to actually keep it from also having that reflexive downhill effect as well. So that's the third category there, and there you have it.
Yeah, it's tricky, and that's one of those things that work very well when the system's running well and when the market's kind of relatively stable. But like every kind of crash or huge macroeconomic shift, it has some pretty outsized results and how certain assets move, and that, I guess, is probably what kind of brought Terra down, was that it was a perfect storm. But your point that you made at the start here, Betty, which is, builders in that chain, and you worked for a lot of those. We at SubQuery also worked for a lot of Terra participants. We actually announced support for Terra about a week before it went under, or was kind of paused. So great timing from us. But there are still a lot of builders and developers in the ecosystem, and people doing a lot of really cool stuff, building amazing applications. And they're all still looking at places to go. And I guess one of the biggest issues with this particular fall of Terra was that it hit the stablecoin. A lot of these teams had their investment rounds and all their assets kind of kept safe in there, which is what was so traumatic or disruptive for the Terra ecosystem. But obviously, I think people are learning from that. But I'm kind of keen to, and that kind of brings me to this next phase, which is, I guess, with Sam. You're building Imbue, which is kind of rethinking how we do investment and crowdfunding and capital raising in a decentralized way. Could you tell us a little bit about the Imbue approach and what you're trying to do differently?
Absolutely. Right. So at its core, what Imbue is milestone-based vesting, and it's milestone-based on votes, on democracy. So, for example, I could be asking for $100,000 to do anything. I need funding for anything. It could be I'm building out a coin. It could be I'm about to mint an NFT and building an NFT marketplace. But it could also be I'm a farmer, right? Or I'm a shop owner, or I'm selling shoes. It could be anything you want. And then what the difference between us and Kickstarter, GoFundMe, Indiegogo, or the multitudes of launch pads that are in the space is you have to define what you're going to do with the money. You have to define milestones. I need 10% to do this, I need 30% to do that, and I need 40% to do milestone, the third milestone, right? As long as it all sums up to 100, you're good. And then what happens is you go up against other people who want funding. And if you define the reward or the what people get for funding you, if it's attractive enough, people will fund you. But they will do so knowing that you have to do the work that you promised. Otherwise, you will not get access to those funds, right? So someone asking for 0% upfront is far more attractive than someone who's asking for 10 or 20 or 30. Because once you get those funds, that's where the risk happens. So you define something. So let's say I open up a shop. I want 10% immediately to set up a website. I get that 10%, but 90% is locked until I do the work for the second milestone. So if for any particular reason I fail, and what we have to accept is projects fail all the time. This is just the nature of startups. The majority will fail. And what happens is if I do fail, so I open up a shop that sells shoes and then a force majeure event happens. I'm not a bad actor, but COVID hits and it's out of my hands. And we see that the government tells me to, shut up shop. I can't succeed anymore. The people who funded me, the people with money at risk, can say, look, I want to raise a vote of no confidence to get the remainder of those locked funds returned to me. So it's enforced by the blockchain and people have votes. And that is how we enforce accountability or empower accountability by the blockchain. And what's really interesting is this does not just apply to Web3, it applies to everyone. Everyone who wants to do work can use this model. So let me flip it. Let me flip it in a scenario where we've got a tremendous amount of interest from the Web2 space, right, in exploring Web3. A company I used to work for, Sony PlayStation, they recently shared the news that, they're exploring the metaverse, right? There's so much interest from Web2 organizations, companies, entities in exploring this space, but they lack the know-how, they lack the expertise, they lack the people. They don't even know where to start, right? And traditionally, what happens when you don't know where to start is you go to consultancies. You go to the big four consultancies. You go to KPMG, Accenture, Deloitte, and you basically say, look, this is what we want to build. And you go through this tendering system where you go and speak to all these different consultancies and you spend so much time, money, and effort trying to figure out how you're going to build something, a proof of concept, a demo. And at the end of this tedious process, there's no guarantee you're going to get what you want. There's no guarantee you're going to get anything resembling what you want. And there's no guarantee you're going to get anything on time at all. But with Imbue, we can flip the process and allow these same entities, same bodies, same companies to submit briefs and say, look, this is what we want built. And then anyone around the world can submit proposals against them and say, hey, I can build this out for you, and here are my milestones. So then you can choose, these entities can choose the most attractive proposal, knowing that their funds are safe until they are happy with the progress, until they vote. So we just switched it up. Switch the voting to the people with money at risk. That's still the same, but it's now not the community, it's the people funding, and it's the community building. And the beauty about this is we now bring opportunities to people that just don't exist where they are. A farmer who has all the resources to succeed, except funding, can request money from the Web3 world because their local bank is just not interested. And at the same time, a developer who lives in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and Latin America can build something for an entity, right, or a governmental body, or a group of people, or a DAO. Treasuries on DAOs, they might want people to build something out for them that just, again, doesn't exist where they are. So we're bringing opportunities to people that just don't exist. And that is what really drew me to Web3. And that to me is what drove me to build Imbue.
So you're absolutely starting with this, just rethinking crowdfunding, but you're going to go much bigger than that and going into more Web 2. And of course, the Acala USD, the Acala stablecoin, is going to be critical to that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And would you say most of the funding will probably be in a stablecoin, or do you expect a lot of funding over time will be as well in other crypto assets?
Yeah, so that's again one of the reasons we chose Polkadot. The freedom to choose what funding you want, the freedom to choose how you want to structure this proposal. Like, it's all up to the initiator. You have the full freedom. The only thing that you don't have say in is when you've actually done your work. But we were actually going to launch before we integrated Acala, but our community said, look, we need to get funding in stable currencies, because the minute you raise funds in anything other than stable currencies, the first thing you're going to do is sell, because you've got to pay for things. You've got to pay for people, you've got to pay for services, you've got to pay for your costs, right? And when we looked across the ecosystem, we're like, the best stable currency that we can implement is the Acala USD, because it's the most that resonates the most with the ecosystem we're building on, right? But we decided that although we're going to have the Acala USD as the default stable currency, we don't want to limit. We don't want to impose. It's all about giving people optionality. That's what Imbue is about, giving people options. But we will absolutely recommend that you go with a stable currency, because you don't want to go 3 months in building something and then the volatility of the markets, right, now change your plans. And you have to start to ask for an amendment or ask for more funds, or these things happen. But with a stable currency, you just reduce your risk.
And Sam, like, you've been around a few different teams, right? You came from Kylan before Imbue, and you started up Imbue, so you've been around a bit, and you've seen a few things. You've seen some projects succeed and some fail, which, as you said, a lot of projects do fail. It's a natural life cycle of kind of startups. But from your background, what do you think? How does that help you when you're building a fundraising platform where your kind of aim is to help these projects succeed?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest issues that we see in this particular space at the moment is a lot of it could be potentially hype driven, right? And unfortunately, when you are hype driven and there's nothing of substance underneath what you're building, so it's a lot of marketing or it's a lot of false promises, people come in, they get really excited, but then they eventually realize that there's nothing of substance and they exit, or their toxicity comes into play, right? And when the community is toxic, that is one of the biggest risks of failure. The people give up. I mean, we've seen it with founders who are in this space. In other communities, I'm not talking about the .salmon space, but other communities basically say, look, I've given up, or I'd like to take a break, or there's just too much toxicity. And unfortunately, that is a massive risk of failure, because at the start of projects, the people driving, the people who are pushing the innovation through, they're the ones that require the most support. So, you know what Betty said about when the bear market hits or when the markets are bad, this is absolutely the best time to build, because you don't have the noise, you don't have the distractions. You know, you're just quietly building and saying, this is the value we're trying to build. This is what we envisage to be helping people. This is how we bring in new real utility, because that's really the only way we move towards mass adoption. The crypto community as a whole, compared to the rest of the world, is a tiny population, right? And the only way we convince more people to come in is if you say, look at this, this improves your lives. This is how you can live a better life. That's what happened with the explosion of social media. So I think one of the main reasons people fail is really toxicity, or realizing that they overpromise things.
And I'm keen to get your idea on this, Betty, as well, because arguably we could say that you've created one of the most, well, if not the most promising stablecoin in Polkadot, obviously, but also one of the biggest parachains in Polkadot. By all means, Acala is a huge success, and what do you think got you there? Was there certain aspects? Obviously you would have raised investment many years ago, and was it just the money, or was it other stuff that really helped you get where you are today?
It's funny you said that, James. Even though I felt we've been building for a long time, but we have to realize Polkadot only just fully launched, symbolized by the XCM, the trustless crushing technology, a week and a half, or maybe maximum 2 weeks ago. And so only then we can kind of like announce. I think a week after that, we launched our liquid staking. That was like the last protocol on Acala that we fully launched. So less than a week ago, I can then claim Acala is fully launched after like 2.5 years. Probably one of the longest building protocol in all DeFi. I think it's not that long for layer one, but then ultimately, Acala is like a MakerDAO like a protocol, even though we're built on a chain. So that was a long time coming. So
well, in many cases, you were building the network as you went, right? Like you had to kind of build a lot of these core fundamental Polkadot technologies, and so I guess we can excuse you for taking the time, Petty.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot that we've learned and evolved. I think one of them is like mentality, because we started out building in a bear market. It was like 2019-ish, and it kind of forced us to think, I guess, very differently compared to if we were to launch in a growth market or the bull market, right? People play a different game, and people are distracted by different opportunities in a bull market. And also, there's so many peer pressure. When everybody is dropping, I guess, free tokens everywhere, and then it kind of forces you to kind of behave in a different way. It's very hard, right? You can by all means resist those. I think at Acala, we are forced to resist those temptations. I'll tell you why. And also, from what we've built, we've kind of not in a game like that either, for a number of reasons. Number one is when we chose a stablecoin, because we kind of position ourselves as an infrastructure. Because of that, we had to choose something that's, well, to the best of our knowledge, is solid and secure. That's why we actually, from all the mechanisms that we could choose, we choose, the over collateralization, very safe model. Even that still have risk, right? Which we kind of very publicly share with people and what they need to look out for. And even like choosing that is number one, right? Because if you are infrastructure, then you have to build something solid, because otherwise you can expect there will be empowerers, like many different other protocols, like Imbue is one of them, and there are other parachains and dApps built on top of AUSD or Acala. Then you don't want them to build on sand, right? And even though we build a stablecoin, we also work with other stablecoin builders, right? Because there are people and teams optimized for different things, and they can choose a different risk spectrum to optimize on, to build on Acala. But for us, our standard is like try to be very risk averse, because for other people that build on Acala, stablecoin included, they can be less risk averse and then to optimize for other things, but not us. Because if you can imagine, similarly for Maker, right? They're very I guess conservative, same as us in terms of attitude. Things like when they choose adding new collaterals, when they manage the parameters, and things like that, right? So as a base layer, that's kind of what you need to do. And then the second thing is, you asked about our path. So because we came from, we've been to experience the ICO rush, and then we then gone into the bear market after the ICO or collapse. Probably 99% of the project didn't come out of it, and so we were very sensitive to not do an ICO. And that's also one of the reasons why we chose Polkadot's model is because of the share security model. So we don't need to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to kind of just secure a chain that we are building. And that's very different from, if you build a Cosmos chain, you do have the flexibility, but then at the same time, you have to come up with your own security, which is mostly determined by the market cap of your own token, right? I think even that is a full-time job, let alone the application that you are trying to build on top of it. So we chose Polkadot. So that was one of the reasons we chose Polkadot, and then we went through the normal kind of startup approach to raise a little bit at the start, and then deliver a test net and then see if it actually works. Well, it seems to attract quite a bit of traction in 2019 and 20, and then we raised a little bit more. So I think from all the layer one chains, we are probably one of the teams raised very little, but last for quite a bit up to this point. So we're certainly, in terms of that is, I guess, relatively boring.
Well,
in terms
no,
of
it's good. It's a good point, though, Betty. It's an interesting point where you're raising only enough that you need to survive, and in a way that forces you to stay hungry and stay sprinting, rather than a lot of teams in the last 6 months have raised huge sums of money, like obscene amounts of money, and they splash it everywhere, but they kind of lose sight of the core purpose of that money. It's not to be flashy. It's not to build reputation. It's to build the product and to deliver that product. And I guess by raising only a little bit and kind of staying hungry and staying focused on your goals, you've got to where you are over a long period of time. But that's what it requires. It's not a sprint; it's a marathon.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, as Sam also pointed out, right? So majority of the startup actually fail. Actually, above 90% of them fail. So I don't think we should act like if we put out a new protocol, it's definitely going to be successful, right? We always say this is an experiment. To the best of our knowledge, we're trying to achieve the goals of, for example, decentralization, creating a system like this or that. But there's always risk involved. And very specifically to Acala, when we first built out the protocol, we've been through Black Thursday on Ethereum. So that was one of the huge hit to Maker, right? So for those who didn't know, like Black Thursday was a sudden market shock, and ETH actually dropped probably 90% from its highest value. And then that kind of triggered a cascading effect of liquidation, and then the whole Ethereum chain almost halted because of so much activity. And then the oracles stopped performing because it didn't cater for gas wars. So there were auctions selling off ETH collateral at $1, and obviously, it was to a detriment to the protocol. And then they actually went insolvent, and also had a huge liquidity crunch because of all the value decreases, and also liquidation stopped being executed properly. And that was also the point where I guess Maker had to introduce USDC as a collateral, and something like that actually had a tremendous value, I think, to Maker themselves, to also all the supporting services like keepers, oracles. As you can see, they all mature over the years, and also created great lessons learned for folks like us, right? So we are innovating essentially alongside with them, and then we've created many on-chain. Like for DeFi, people often overlooked the off-chain aspect of DeFi. I bet many people didn't know many of the DeFi protocol rely on off-chain keepers, so they are essentially risk watchers to trigger liquidation on-chain. I bet many people didn't know on Ethereum or any EVM chains, these are still managed off-chain. So if anything happened between that communication, if you couldn't pay for the gas fee, for example, you couldn't send the transaction, and those liquidation couldn't get triggered, and your protocol wouldn't function properly. And this is exactly something that we picked up from analyzing the entire event, and then we managed to do all of that on chain using Substrate, right? So this is exactly as innovators, you use all the tech that available at hand and solve real problems out there that can really cause pain. So those are the, I guess, over time that we've learned and kind of evolved, and we also understand this is a long-term game, right? It doesn't matter how you smile and be really cool when the market is going upwards. You have to kind of stay afloat when the market goes down, and also in any kind of risk circumstances. So that's why we kind of build a network of partners like Correlate and others, and also continue to most important is continue to innovate to safeguard the protocol, because there's always something we don't know, right? I think we are lucky that we've been through Black Thursday, that we learned something that the protocol couldn't handle, and then we built things around it. But who knows what is the next Black Swan event, and how we would be able to kind of innovate around it. So this is
there always will be black swans. Absolutely, there always will be.
Exactly. So don't think if you're holding a certain crypto asset that's been around for 10 years, it's good for go. Or today you have a wake up call from Terra's algorithmic stablecoin, then all the other stablecoins are now safe. It's not quite like that, right? So it's important to actually understand kind of first principle, what's behind the thing that you're holding. And then if you understand the underlying, whether it's assets or the risks, then you can make the choice, right? I'm willing to take those risks if things go wrong. Or maybe I just diversify. Maybe I hold some of this and some of those, and kind of achieve your purposes. I think if we have a little bit more sanity for everybody, not just from the founders, but also participants like users as well. And of course, as founders, we can do more to educate. But also, folks, if can kind of learn a bit more, then we can have more sanity, I guess, in the industry.
Yeah, and it's absolutely true. We all stand on the shoulders of giants in this industry. We've all learned a lot from previous issues, from previous Black Swan events, and we're all kind of coming through. But I guess we all have experience of thing, and I think you touched on this, Betty, which is connections and partners in the ecosystem. It really makes a difference in terms of building a product that works well for other people. And Sam, I'm curious to know, are you trying to build this into Imbue where, obviously you've done the milestones. So as Betty said, you only give enough money to keep the focus on the next task at hand or the next priority. But are you also looking at providing other services around that funding, connections, community, business development, marketing support, all these other pieces to help really supercharge the growth of your portfolio companies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to start off, the funding question you guys mentioned, right? That's very, very important. That's why we decided at Imbue is that we're not going to do any funding. We are not funded at all. We have zero investors. We didn't do angel. We didn't do private seed. Nothing, because we are saying that we're going to build this as open source until we demonstrate the value or utility. And that's how we protect our community, right? We as a group of engineers, every single one of us has over 15 years of experience in the industry, right? So we're confident that we can deliver this. And we started this back in October, and look at us now in coming close to June, and we're about to deploy to Rococo because we've already passed a successful testnet. We thought we were going to only get 10 users, and we got 400. So we're very confident. But when it comes to your question about how do you supercharge people, right? We have already received this feedback from the community. Now, imagine one of your milestones was I'm going to build a UI, and then you set up things like these are going to be you shared screenshots. So this is what I think the UI will look like. But then eventually, when you submitted your milestone, it didn't look anything like what you promised, right? And the reason being is you lack some front end of engineers, right? We're building. Part of the feedback you're getting from your voters, people who say no, they can explain why no, and they can clarify what other skill sets you need, right, to demonstrate what you actually need to implement, right? So then you're linking people who are building to the defined need that was already identified because the milestone was not approved. So through that, you're bringing these communities together, and that's how we bring in Imbue Enterprise, which is the Web2 entities I mentioned earlier, submitting briefs and proposals. The initial part would be people who have identified gaps in their milestones and how the community can build work with them. And what's really interesting is that we're working with other communities outside the .SAMA space. The Web3 community, for example, is hosting like a 24-hour space every day, right? And they've got a massive community who are just based on ETH. And they're coming up with these really interesting ideas on solutions, how to solve them. And through that, they're building a DAO, and they're identifying people who can do work and identifying projects that can be built. And we're working with them to help them identify these ideas and form teams to solve them, because that's really how people succeed, by forming teams. And you have a lot of people supporting you rather than one or two individuals who say, look, I have an idea, and they sometimes fall by the wayside. So it's really important to supercharge, you said this, by forming the people around you and identifying what can help. The more eyes we build on something, the better we build something towards mass adoption. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's and I guess like what Imbue is kind of going towards is in a way you are like a competition is with investors, with VCs, right? Like you're trying to attract projects to come and fund their project your way versus going to some big investor that's really thrown.
Yeah.
Or are you looking at a way to maybe work with those investors as well?
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. Like, some people might look at. I mean, it depends on who you ask, right? So if you ask your everyday investor, they're like, yeah, you might be competing with VCs because to an initiator, that's who your competition are. I can either go to Imbue or I can go to like a VC or an investor. But at the same time, investors might be like, actually, we can use Imbue to invest in this particular project, knowing that's how we keep our funds safe, and we can convince these people that we're going to allocate their funds because it's all transparent and on chain. But at the same time, a competitor could be someone like Upwork, where you have some skill set that you can utilize, and you can go to Fiverr or Upwork or anything to say, look, I can build something, even if it's like I'm a plumber, right? And I can come in and do something. I can use Imbue to do the same thing, although it's not going to quite work yet. We haven't solved the Web3 to the Web2 bridge. But I think it's very important to actually build this bridge, because that's how you convince people who have absolutely no interest. I have no interest in Web3. I don't see how it helps me. That's how you move towards mass adoption, by convincing those people. The people already on Web3, they're already convinced. They're already passionate about the space. But the next step up is convincing people who have no interest. And to me, that's a problem really that's really exciting. How do you bridge the fiat world to the Web2 world with people who are just not at all interested? So yeah, so our competitors are really, really diverse, but none of them are trying to solve this accountability on the blockchain. And to me, that blockchain is how you add transparency and how you add visibility. And that's why that's our core ethos.
We're running out of time, but I'm curious to ask one last question of you both. What do you think the biggest lesson is from the Terra collapse for the past 2 weeks? What do you think that is the biggest lesson for us all to take forward in crypto?
Ladies first. Betty, go for it.
Thanks, Sam. I think, well, my views might be very different and might be unpopular. I actually think everyone is responsible. But of course, people who invented it, people who advertising it, there's different level of responsibility. But I would actually argue that you can't change what other people built, but at least we can take personal accountability from our own sides, right? If I participated, then you need to really ask those hard questions. What really attracted me to participate, and what question I didn't ask, and which part I didn't actually understand. Because that is actually only one of the projects in the bull cycle that did this, right? And also, when the incident happened, there are actually multiple contributors to its fall. there may even not be a attacker to that protocol, right? That's all arguable. So and there are other projects also in the ecosystem that also leverage the bull market, and then there's a lot of this hype going on. And then for everyone who's participating in any of those projects, I think if we understand those risks, and that's what you're willing to lose, and happy to experiment, and that's all fine. But otherwise, then there's some personal responsibility for participating in that. And second of all, I think if you're getting most of your information from Twitter, then you have to think about it again, because I think this is a very extreme platform to get very genuine information, because you can see in this particular incident everything is exaggerated, right? There's a hype, there's greed, there's various different interest parties, and there's also different people come in for different purposes, and you don't know all of that. You come in with your own sort of I guess assumptions to participate, right? So Twitter is really not the best place to get all the information you need, because you can see, you have to be aware when you use social media, even using forums, is like usually there's a very extreme voices are the loudest, and they are not necessarily the most accurate and also most genuine and most unbiased. So think about that. Usually the loudest voice on many of those social media forums, they're not usually the most genuine and unbiased voice. So so that makes really hard for people to make decisions. So I would encourage, from the project perspective, like founders perspective, obviously, release as much information, make it transparent as possible. But also for all the people participating, is getting first-hand information, trying to understand it, and also using a long form rather than a short form like Twitter-like places to get your info. So that would be my take.
Yeah, definitely. Sam, what about you? What's your lesson?
Well, Betty was a brilliant answer from her, so I'll try to add very little value if I can. But I think she touched upon something that's very close to my heart, and that's accountability. That's really what drove me to build Imbue. We absolutely need to be held accountable to these actions, and I think a lot of what Betty said about Twitter being an echo chamber. Sometimes it's very easy to find someone who agrees with you. It's very hard to find someone who asks questions, right? And we need to hold projects accountable. That's actually what we tell our community. Please, 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 not only hold us accountable to our words, but our actions. Like, if you see people asking questions, sometimes difficult questions, so the community themselves needs to support them, even if that goes against. And it's very hard, because when you're invested in crypto, now you have financial investment. It's very hard to hear someone question something, right? If you feel personally attacked, and you can see this, right? I know engineers I worked with, truly respect, who raise valid questions about ETH, right, and say, look, this is not a very performant system, and they automatically get attacked because people feel attacked when you criticize something. But the accountability is crucial, and that's one of the reasons why my goal, like the next step after we build out Imbue and we get so many people using it, I want to start building out independent DAOs. I'm going to call them audit DAOs. And they're going to get people who are, bring people who are engineers, influencers, community members. And their only job is to get funded from this DAO to validate ideas, to validate proposals, to look at white papers, right, which are not necessarily the most legible to people, to your everyday investor, and look at what's built, look at GitHub, look at, is this project actually delivering what they're promising, or is it just vaporware? And if there are questions like what happened with Luna, raise them and highlight them so people can read this space. So it's not just Twitter. You go and look at what people have done in research, and they're independent. They're independent because they're not getting like access to private sales or something. And you see this problem. Absolutely, we have this problem with influencers who have a lot of trust and a lot of reach, but unfortunately, they don't necessarily have their audience's best interest at heart, right? So that's what I want to build, and that's what I hope Imbue will enable us to do, because now the community can fund people who are actually going to do these audits and protect the underlying community.
No, absolutely.
I hope that adds value.
And that's a good point, Sam. Collaboration, not conflict. If I could add anything, my lesson is that regardless of how big a fork can be for an ecosystem, the builders in the ecosystem are just going to keep building. And I guess that's what is important for us at SubQuery, Acala, and Imbue, is helping builders carry on with the process and the important tasks of building the next future. So thank you very much, Betty and Sam, for joining the first ever SubQuery sessions. We've gone way over time, but as always, it's always an excellent time to talk about different things and cover different topics. I really appreciate you joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and also thanks for building the service that you guys building as SubQuery. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's essential. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, guys. And for those that are listening, send us a tweet and let us know who you'd like to hear from next. We might be talking to anyone on any topic at all. But yeah, I'd love to hear your ideas about other and people we can invite on to SubQuery sessions or other topics we can cover. So thank you very much for tuning in. This will be recorded so you can listen later. We're sharing it live, and we're sharing the recorded copy to all afterwards. But it was a pleasure, and see you next time.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye.